we've asked for a jury trial because I think if a group of average Vermonters are presented with these facts, they'll understand and do what's right and fair. And so I hope we can get to that point. But you've articulated it quite well. You know what happened on September 27th, 2021, a date that will live in infamy.
Yes.
When they took the name off the chapel by dawn's early light, before most college students were awake. And then the college put out a statement. Maybe you've seen that,
Oh, yes.
Which I think terribly mischaracterizes Governor Mead's life and legacy. And that's another key element of this whole thing. You know, most people have a legacy that is mixed or not perfect. You can find some blemish on any public official's record, Washington, Jefferson, so I was really taken by a book I read a year or two ago by Anthony Kronman, whom we cite in our complaint. He's a former law school dean at Yale. But his point is we should look at someone's dominant legacy. And as a retired professor here said a year or so ago, I hope we are all not judged by our worst day, especially when it's taken out of context after the passage of a century. So there are a number of issues here. You've identified one, which is our breach of contract, because this is not, as is the case in some other schools where they just wanted to honor some distinguished alumnus. He gave the chapel to the college, and he specified the name when he did so in 1914. So that's our first point, and then into the other question of legacy. The college's lawyer dismisses the whole point of the governor's legacy and said, well, there are different opinions, but the issue here is a contract and baloney with all this stuff. Well, he was a very distinguished, successful, actually progressive by the standards of his time, donor and alumnus, and we're going to keep talking about that.
And as I understand it, he didn't merely give a check and then walk away. He was actively involved in the building and in the details. He was hands-on.
And I think the college will probably argue that, well, nothing's forever. Well, I think when you insist that a building be made of Vermont marble, it is forever. I mean, there are some marbles that are thousands of years old, So the college, in its announcement in September of 21, talked about Governor Mead's remarks in his 1912 speech and how terrible they were, and therefore we have to take his name off. And they said specifically in their press release that the name was placed on the chapel to honor the governor and his wife. The governor made it clear it was to honor his ancestors. And so one question I often ask people at the college is, so what do you have against James Mead or Peter Mead or Roswell Mead, his ancestors? I mean, what did they do? So, I mean, that's the sad irony of this, Jane. They talk about what a thoughtful and thorough process they had to make this decision. They took the name off a building without even knowing for whom the building was named. I mean,
I don't see the logical relationship between his farewell address and the law that was passed years after he died. An email where the school said, we don't see any record of a conditional gift here. There's no evidence of that. They denied all the things that are so obviously there.
Today, of course, if a gift of this kind were made, there'd be a 100-page contract with all kinds of legalese and specifics and details.
To read his remarks, it seems that it was customary for a departing governor to look forward and suggest legislation for the future.
Yeah, not so much now, I can attest, because the tradition in those days was that governors served a 1-2-year term and then moved on. So it was pretty brief. And so you're right. They offered a prescription for the future. Nowadays, we don't. We talk about the wonderful things we've accomplished while we were there. But at the time, that's right. The only other specific thing I've seen is a letter from a state senator saying, when we're going to take this up after you leave office, and we'll always do it in your honor, or so it was a favorable reference to this part of his speech by a legislator. But as you may know, the following year, the legislature passed a bill restricting the issuance of marriage licenses that was vetoed by his successor, not on a policy reasons, but for constitutional concerns. And then that was 1913. Then I haven't looked at every journal, Jane, but in 1915, a similar bill was introduced again, but not passed. And then I don't think anything happened until later on, as you say, 1931. There may have been something in between, but I'm not aware of anything that passed until 31, when he was cold in the ground. That's exactly right. So I think their argument is that he was the first prominent, crucial leader of this movement, and he got it started in Vermont. And I don't know. But in 1931, when the bill finally passed on sterilization, a majority of states had already passed one. So we were kind of behind the curve.
And there was a famous, or maybe infamous, Supreme Court case that endorsed sterilizing imbeciles. And
he was very mainstream.
His specific suggestion was about a new procedure called a vasectomy. I don't see how that applies to women. I mean, and they make this logical jump from he first suggested this to this policy has harmed French Canadians and women.
Right. Yeah, that's another key point. As I keep saying, everything's a key point, but it is. Their implication in that press release of a racist motive is really offensive to the descendants and to me, because I've challenged the college. I didn't file this until after I'd had 2 meetings with the college bureaucrats to try to talk some sense into them, without any success, obviously. And I said, show me some evidence that there was a racial motivation in the governor's proposal. And of course they haven't. And frankly, this motion that you'll see from their lawyer parrots that same implication, which is really annoying for a lawyer to do that. So, he left college to join the Union Army to fight slavery. I mean, there is nothing.
There's that element there of ingratitude. To me, he's like the classic American success story, the self-made man. He, with diligence and industry, he arises. He was penniless when he graduated Middlebury, right? I think the complaint says, and he rises above his circumstances, and he gives back to his. This seemed like a labor of love, a gift of love. He wanted to give. I mean, it's everything that they should all these ideals that they should celebrate and espouse, and their record of supporting forced sterilization. I mean, I didn't see it in the farewell address.
No, in fact, in 1931, the name of the law that passed was an act relating to voluntary sterilization.
Yes, he distinguished between imbeciles and people who were merely deaf, dumb, and blind, who, if you supported them with the right education, could become independent, self-supporting members of society.
Helen Keller was a eugenicist, arguably. I mean, along with W.E.B. Du Bois and a lot of well-known people whom we celebrate.
Are they that upset about the gender-affirming care? Which really, what is that? Gender-affirming care for minors? What is that but you're sterilizing them.
Right. And every afternoon, I think it's 12:30 or 1 or something, but I heard it today, the bells from Mead Chapel chime. This is the college's brand.
You see that and you think Middlebury College.
Yeah. And that's why we argue unjust enrichment, too, because the college has had the use of this wonderful structure for such a long time. And I guess the other point I was going to make is there's a broader context here in terms of Middlebury's problem with free expression. We had a couple of incidents here about which perhaps you heard in 2017, Charles Murray. And then 2 years later, we had a Polish scholar named Ryszard Legutko come, and his speech was canceled. And this is a slight exaggeration, but the way I described that was the guy came from Poland And a few hours before his speech, the college pulled the plug on his presentation. Well, actually, he was visiting a couple of other campuses too. And so I had dinner with Professor Legutko after his non-speech, and he said, in decades of speaking all across the world on campuses, this has never happened before. And he was in Maine the night before, and I forgot if it was Bates or Bowdoin or Colby or one of the schools over there, and said, not a problem. And so it's a Middlebury problem. We've had professors here threatened with discipline for controversial research or remarks. Students come into me and say, I can't express my view in Professor so-and-so's class because it's self-censorship, it's academic freedom, it's shutting down speakers. This is just the latest episode. And, I was taken to task by someone for using the term cancel culture. And I relayed all this and I asked, what would you call it? The judge he seems like a great guy. And he said, well, I've never opened an estate this old before, but I'm prepared to do so. And so he did. And I said just this morning he was checking in to see how we're doing. So they asked me to assume this responsibility. The court agreed, and so here we are.
I wonder what they thought. Did they think they would just do it and that would be the end of it? That no one would be around to protest, really take them to task?
I don't know the answer to that. They talk about this thoughtful process to come to this conclusion. So I asked the college's attorney, I'd like to see the task force report. Oh, that's confidential. And under our records retention policy, you'll love this. It's not available for 75 years.